give it a second to boot up the recording. Be good to go.
Cool. Yeah, so I'll kick off a little bit. I'll introduce myself, what's been happening in the space, and then I'll invite Joelle to join me in the conversation, and we'll have a bit of a question and answer session. So appropriately, I didn't get a chance to introduce myself in the whip around, and I think that's worked out well because I can do so now. So I'm a web developer. I've been developing for almost 12 years or so, and have done some work in not-for-profit spaces like the Australian College of Rural and Remote Medicine, working with the eHealth team there, and National Gallery of Victoria as well. And right now I've got a website that I do during the day, and I'm helping get things going with the Humane Technology Australia. And we're looking to be a satellite group that supports the work that the Centre for Humane Technology does over in the US. So I'll briefly talk about what humane technology is and what our goals are in Australia. And hopefully we'll have some time for audience questions. We'll see how we go, I suppose. So given the audience of the meetup, there's probably some level of familiarity of the topic, but I'll do a bit of a speed summary, and then we can have a common foundation for discussion, which I think is something that's lacking generally these days. So I think that's pretty important. The attention economy and the impacts of social media are a pretty hot topic at the moment since the release of the popular Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma. I'll just switch to gallery view. How many people have seen The Social Dilemma so far? We've got a few shakes and a few nods. Okay, so the Social Dilemma features the co-founders of the Centre for Humane Technology from the US, one of which, Tristan Harris, has also appeared on this week's Q&A on ABC, and has been on Sam Harris's podcast and on Ellen's show as well. The two co-founders are Silicon Valley techies who were growing concerned about the effects that technology is having on us at an individual level, such as increased rates of mental health issues, especially in younger teenagers, and also on how it's polarizing us and fracturing our shared understanding of what's going on in the world. And it sort of threatens the very idea of being able to talk with someone about the same reality these days. It's making it more difficult to have healthy public discourse about issues like COVID's source, for example, and the government responses to it, or the Black Lives Matter movement. And I think we can all relate to things that have popped up in the media and public stunts that relate around those things and the differences in opinion there. And just today it came out that Magda Szubanski and Nidal Yuan were the subject of coordinated attacks of hate on Twitter by right-wing extremist groups as a response to government ads on wearing masks that recently screened in Victoria. The message of humane technology isn't anti-technology. It's not just a suggestion to take a digital detox. We're about looking at tangible, quantifiable impacts and tracing these problems back to design mechanisms and engagement strategies that are at the core of business models in the technology products that we use every day. Our goals are to raise awareness around the seriousness of these issues, link our social fragmentation back to its sources where it's clear there is a link, and advocate for solutions and interventions, working with both the technology industry as well as government. Tristan Harris, one of the co-founders, has spoken at multiple US Senate hearings, for example, to give his insights into the harms that tend to be downplayed when you ask the big tech companies what's going on. So James and myself and a few others that we've got to officiate are looking to do similar work here in Australia, and especially understanding what's different about Australian society and our technology and communications ecosystems, which might require a different approach to the US, as well as understand the implications of the fact that none of the tech giants are headquartered in Australian soil, yet they're still changing the ways that we're communicating and spending our time in all of the same ways. We're looking to be a point of reference for the public generally, as well as having a close relationship with technologists specifically to educate and have two-way conversations to understand the issues as they see them. we're hoping to soon organise some roundtable think tanks with experts across technology, government, sociology, psychology, various fields that would have perspectives on this situation, so that we can explore solutions and put together position statements and recommendations to legislators. I'll bring Joelle into the conversation now. Joelle Kolmanovitz is a principal product manager at Atlassian and has been a product manager on Google Glass, Plus, Maps, and Assistant. And he was at Google in Silicon Valley when Tristan Harris was there and had sent his original internal slide deck raising concerns about ethical practices in the tech space. So yeah, thanks for taking some time, Joelle. What was your reaction when you opened Tristan's slide deck?
I think more than anything else, it was excitement because there was this sort of latent feeling of, it was still early on. I had joined Google, I think, don't remember exactly how many months it had been. It's 8 years ago now, but I had recently come over. I finished uni in Australia. I went over to Silicon Valley to join in and go to the Googleplex and everything. And there was this latent feeling of like, oh, this is all really cool. Like, surely there's got to be some catch, like that this is. And as I learned and was trained by Google, and it's interesting how that happens. I would do things like we would have book clubs. And we would have books like Nir Eyal's Hooked, How to Create Habit-Forming Products, on our book list. And it was essentially like, sure, you didn't have to read the book, but we would all talk about it as product managers and this new wave of PMs joining the company. And we'd read through that and I'd go, this sounds a lot like some stuff that I had learned from some psychology electives I took at uni. Really interesting to see it directly applied towards like making people do things in tech, towards like literally calling it habit forming, not just like engagement. Like that there was not even a veneer of trying to make it seem acceptable. It was just like, oh, prima facie, this is fine. We are making people form habits to use our products. And that was weird. So when I read Tristan's slide deck, I was like, this is great. Someone's actually like really thinking about it. See, I knew it wasn't just going to be a matter of that we're all just kind of going in face first to do all this stuff without really thinking about it. I knew people were thinking about it. This is great. I was really excited. And as he calls out in the social dilemma, that lasted for a brief moment of time and then nothing happened.
It's easy to get swept up in the culture of something, and when everyone's swimming the same way downstream, it makes its own current, I think. And to break away from that pack is something that's hard to do. And there's definitely been a few people who've been brave enough to do that. I made the bold claim earlier that technology companies are threatening the possibility that we can have a shared understanding of reality and objective truth. Do you agree with that claim? And if so, what is it in particular that's causing the threat, perhaps for people who haven't seen Social Dilemma or are familiar with the topic?
I would definitely agree. I mean, you've hedged it, right? You've said they can be a threat. But I agree that it does happen. And it's not just that this is a social media thing. If we get into it, there are some interesting examples of mainstream media causing the same rifts. But I don't know about the rest of you. I'd actually be quite interested to see. So I'll tell you a very quick story, and then I'd love to know, how many of you have experienced something like this. I have a family member I used to be really close to, and we hung out a lot. It was an in-law. He's in Canada, and hung out as much as we could when I visited. Friendly guy, also a bit of a techie, works in IT as he calls it. And earlier this year, he just started sharing some moderately weird content into our family group chat, stuff with like, he started talking about this like, oh, the globalist agenda. And I was like, I wonder what he means by that. Oh, well. Within a few weeks, he'd moved from the globalist agenda to just outright conspiracy theories. COVID-19 was created by Bill Gates. It was also created by the Chinese Communist Party, and it's also harmless. All of the above at the same time. So it started getting messy. And even as he pushed these into the family group chat, what I found interesting was it just kind of immediately semantically linked like, oh, other, conspiracies or misinformation of the past. And for me, he kind of went across the line more than anything else when he started talking about Planned Parenthood in the States, like selling baby parts, which is like a thoroughly debunked thing that also is really unpleasant to have in your family group chat. Just be confronted with that. I'm one of quite a large number of parents in that group chat. I confronted him about it, and it was amazing. It always ended with him just doing outright character assassination. Like anything I said or anyone else said or any other claim or any other source who disagreed with him was basically terrible. Oh, the Washington Post, it's the Washington Compost. Oh, Joel, you think something else? Clearly you're having some cognitive dissonance. That's a serious mental illness. I hope you get better soon. That sort of thing. And it's gotten to the point that like I can't talk to him anymore. So I'd love to see, like, for the rest of you, in any form, like, have you had those sorts of interactions where like, wow, I thought I knew this person, but they seem to believe all these things that I just don't understand how they believe these things. I'm gonna do something visual I can see a bit better than a tiny nod. Yeah, a couple of here and there. For those of you who haven't, I'm glad. I hope that is more a reflection of the company you keep and their ability to be resilient to this than the fact that you just don't know, because it's pretty likely.
And it's not always easy to know other people's thoughts, and they can keep them to themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that one of the differences between how things used to be pre kind of social media, and even though we had different sources of information that may be in different wings of the political bias, is that at least you knew you were watching or say reading the Murdoch Press, or reading the Weekly or something like that, and you knew what stream you were consuming. Whereas I'm on Facebook, you're on Facebook, we, without thinking about it, we kind of just assume we're looking at the same Facebook. Or it's easy to unconsciously forget that everyone's got this, or the however many billion users all have their own different reality being presented to them. So I was thinking I could get you to talk about cognitive biases and how technology came to be so good at targeting them, because sometimes we think it might be an evil plotting room at Facebook, and it's not just about Facebook, but we seem to use it as a bit of an example. Like, are they strategizing how to make us outraged and addicted there, or is there something else that's going on?
It's it's funny. It's such a difficult problem. They are actively strategizing how not to do that, right? They have quite a substantial team that's been working on this for quite a while. And I know from the outside, I'm among the number of people outside of Facebook, but I still have plenty of friends who like work there. I'm still in contact with my friends in the Bay Area whose COVID haircuts go down to here, right? Because they literally can't leave their homes. And yeah, they're really strongly trying to prevent these things, but it is a big uphill battle against a lot of human nature. There's a really detailed series for those of you who would like to dig into the great depth. Wait, but why? Has done a great series called The Story of Us. It's still in progress, but there's many episodes. Yeah, I highly recommend it. But in summary, some of the most notable biases at play. So there are a couple of things. The series goes into more detail about studies and everything. So check citations there. But essentially, there are a few things. One of the most notable ones is that among human beings, as we discuss things, we tend to have two primary emotions that cause us to be most likely to share content. Does anyone, if you actually already know, don't say it, but does anyone have any guesses what those two emotions are?
Is it rage, frustration?
Yep, anger is one of them. That's right. The other one's more positive.
Acceptance?
Sorry?
Something around acceptance, like within a community or something?
Or pride, maybe?
Like pride-related things are kind of okay, but the other one is kind of awe, like, oh, wow, that's amazing, right? If you think about it, you think back to any piece of content you shared, and like some of the most memorable are like, wow, I can't believe that happened. That's so amazing, right? Like, oh, a moon landing is an extreme example. A more personal one might be like, oh, my friend just like ran a marathon. That's incredible. Good on them. But the more awe-inspiring, the better. However, anger wins out. Anger is often more powerful, and it's much easier to exploit. It's much, much easier to make someone angry than it is to make them awestruck. And so purely in terms of any kind of repeating system that goes through multiple iterations of even a small bias, that bias gets massively, massively amplified. I'll give you a very simple example. So in tech, among other industries, there is a significant difference between the level of seniority of people that correlates quite strongly with if they're male. And the reason for this is that even the tiniest little bias, it's basically compound interest, right? If you want to get promoted from level 4 to level 5, and you have like even a 1% chance of that being more likely because you're male, unfortunately, that compounds at level 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 and 10, right? And so the same thing happens where if I get a piece of information that's been shared via 5 of you, if each of you was at least moderately more biased to share something anger-inducing, then the feed I'm going to get is going to be more full of anger. Now the good news is, our feeds aren't constantly full of anger because Facebook's trying to do something about it. But that's just one of the most obvious biases. There are plenty of others at play as well, let alone just the basic kind of habit formation of it.
It reminds me of evolution. It helps me to think about it in terms of evolution, that the strongest traits survive, and that's true of messages that happen on a platform like Twitter, especially where it's public. That Darwinian theory kind of wins out for the messages that don't pick on those biases.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
The headquarters for tech platforms that we use the most for our information and communication are all based in the US, which you've spent some time working there, and you might have a good perspective on the differences. What are the implications of using US-based technology from here in Australia, considering that there's more pressure and discussion around legislative oversight, especially around sharing news recently with the ACCC situation?
Yeah, it's interesting. So to start with, there are some of the things that are, to me obvious because I've been thinking about it for a while, but until you experience it, it's not so obvious. Just basically the people that build the technology, as much as we try to build for everyone, it's difficult to put ourselves in everybody's shoes. You just can't. It's really difficult to build an app for a blind person if you've never met one, let alone if you've never closed your eyes. And I might sound like I'm stretching the metaphor, but start turning that into other things like basic diversity. The fact that so many men in tech are involved in the production of products means that little things like, I saw a great article recently on Strava has this feature that if you're running around and someone else using Strava runs past you, you can see their name and you can see their running route and you can see a picture of them, which means you can infer where they live. Now, for any of you who are not immediately freaking out that that is a terrible feature, you should be, because it makes it incredibly easy to harass people, particularly women. And that feature was designed by a team who, if they had a bunch of women on the team, I would be surprised if they were listened to when that feature was launched. And so the same thing applies here. We have Americans designing our technology. I love Americans. I'm American. I was born there. I'm Australian too. But one of the things I've definitely noticed is that in America, there's a much stronger culture of, just do it and clean up the mess afterwards. Let's just innovate, innovation above all else. And that's one of the reasons why America is so dominant. But at the same time, it's, as you say, it's kind of Darwinian theory. It's survival of the fittest. And in this case, the fittest doesn't mean the best for society. It means most willing to take large numbers of risks as quickly as possible, which is what the venture capital industry does. So that has big ramifications, but it's not to say that we're powerless.
That's a bit of a scary thought, because it seems like government always moves a little bit slower than business anyway. And if Australia as a culture is less likely to take risks, then it could mean that we're behind the 8 ball even further. I did hear about a study where that showed that Australians are more likely to change their opinion about a politician if they if they're encouraged to think that that politician has been telling mistruths or misinformation. Much more likely to change their opinion about the politician than an American would be. So I think, I don't know why that might be the case, but I think we have some amount of luck that hopefully we have a bit more natural resilience in that space. When we were speaking earlier, you mentioned around that if we make some legislative changes here, then because those tech platforms are playing in our country, and I'm not sure exactly what our market share of their total revenue would be, but they will have to respond to that. So do you want to talk about that a bit more?
Yeah, sure. So there's a really good blogger, I suppose, Ben Thompson. He does Stratechery, And he's done an article that I think is really, really good about this, which I'd be happy to send around. So by the way, he's not in Australia at all, and yet he focused on Australia's news media bargaining code, breaking down the code and Australia's fake news. And essentially, he made a really interesting argument that I like as kind of showing why this matters. Before I get into that, first, has anyone here not heard of GDPR? No? Okay, great. That's good. Okay, so Sam, basically general data protection regulation. It's regulation in Europe to protect European citizens' data globally. And what's interesting is Europe is a big enough market that, of course, you would think, oh, well, they have to comply and everything. And yes, they do. And I've worked on, and I'm actually literally currently working on GDPR controls for Atlassian and Google. And it essentially means you have to do certain things like allow people to opt out of personalized tracking to use your service. And it actually makes it unacceptable to say, oh, well, if you want to opt out, you just can't use it, which is interesting. It's a different philosophy to the States. And now the ACCC here is trying to enforce a bargaining code between large tech platforms, specifically Google, and Australian news media. This in itself is not intrinsically good or bad. The nature of what they've proposed, I have some strong concerns about, but there's something interesting to it, which is currently a negative thing, but could be turned into a positive thing. They have actually put into this code that news platforms need to have agency over where their content is shared. Now, this, again, kind of sounds mild, but what it means is that if one of us wants to share an article from The Australian to the rest of us, that The Australian can go and see that we've done that, and potentially, if one of us comments on that article saying something defamatory about a politician on Facebook, right? The fact that we've still commented on an Australian article from The Australian, they can then say, oh, that's not okay. We're going to delete your comment, or we're going to take down your share of that article. Now, if this isn't scaring you yet, the reach for this is global. It essentially means that as long as these companies exist at all in Australia, they have to change their entire global mechanisms and operations to support this. It means that if two people that none of us have ever heard of in a country that none of us can name share this article from The Australian from one to the other, Rupert Murdoch still has agency over what they've done and can still take action. Now that's scary as it is, but the silver lining is that it's a good example of how Australian regulation can actually affect and influence these players globally. And I think that that's a good thing. And that's where Facebook may seem disingenuous for saying like, oh, yes, we want more regulation, please regulate us. But they're not wrong. They're trying to speed up that government is slow, and they're doing what they can in the meantime. And they shouldn't be the ones who make some of these big decisions, and they know it.
And Google and Facebook have at least put on the face that they are willing to, or they're threatening to pull out of operations in Australia altogether. Which I'm not sure if anyone can believe that they would want to do that, but it's raised some interesting conversations. There was an article recently that's saying that if that happens, would the ABC be able to step in and provide an alternative social network for us all to use in Australia that would be sort of, could be open source, it could be to our best interests. It's hard to fathom that reality, but it's certainly, it's going to be interesting times ahead with that ACCC talks, and also the Twitter, Facebook, and Google are all being they all have to testify in a couple of weeks' time at a Senate hearing to revise Section 230 of the Communications Act, I believe, some act similar to that, which is United States based. But it's to do with those platforms' responsibilities for what gets published or what gets posted on there, and whether the extent of curatorship and the responsibilities that come along with it. So there'll be definitely a lot that's going to be happening in that space. We should probably turn towards some solutions as well. If we know about these techniques that platforms use, and you're aware of the one-sided point of view that you see, is that enough to protect us from being harmed or from the ill effects?
It's like the way that the Center for Humane Tech breaks it down. There are actions that we can take as users, as people. There are actions that technologists can take. So we as technologists, especially if we work in these platforms, and there are actions the government can take. I think we can certainly help ourselves. You know, I have very few notifications on my phone. I recommend the same to all of you. I make it go grayscale at a certain time of night. Or there are things like that that you can do to protect yourself. But in the end, you know, self-serving protectionism is not going to help the society. And that's one of the things that I saw in America, is that everything is very individualistic, to the point of that I don't really think it's sustainable in some ways. So yes, there are absolutely things that we can do. You know, the interesting point is, though, the boundary between as individuals trying to deal with these systems versus as technologists trying to build around them or within them. I think the ABC social network example is fascinating because, you know, you could think about like, well, if that were to happen, you know, if they were to, you know, deign to reach out to any of us and say, hey, we're doing this thing, can you give us some advice? There are so many things we could do. You know, there are some of the best practices we could take that the large platforms have adopted. Things like Twitter's somewhat recent, you can't share certain things unless you have actually literally clicked to open them. So if you see a tweet about a news article, you literally can't share that article until you've at least clicked through, which reduces shares and, you know, increases, you know, reducing shares is like a scary thing for a company like Twitter, but it turns out that it seems to have the kind of asymmetric effect they're looking for, that it disproportionately reduces what they think of as the wrong shares. And look, there's a whole who watches the Watchmen question there, but I do believe that we generally have common ideas of what is good. We just have diverging ideas of how to execute on it, especially as things get more polarized. We could talk about something more specific though.
Well, I was at risk of asking a more general question. So are there a lot of, so I think these platforms can be demonized a little bit for not doing anything, but the truth is there has been some positive shifts, such as what you mentioned there. YouTube's also introduced an option to say how long you want to watch for, and give you a warning when you have exceeded that. I don't know, has anyone ever used or hit that? I didn't know about that until I read about it in an article. Yep, someone's used it there.
That's great.
And so, yeah, there is movement from the platforms in response to this, but it's too often seems to be a bit of an opt-in, or only if it doesn't impact the bottom line too much. So, well, I mean, what are the solutions here? If we've got, if we had an Australian only ABC run social media network, we could rebuild it from the ground up. But what do you think the solutions might be for the existing platforms if we do continue to get to use them?
Yeah, I think there are some things that can continue to be built upon. For example, increasing the friction to share things, especially certain kinds of things. We also want to be careful not to stray too far into assigning the platforms to try and solve the problem that actually comes from the content. Platforms are amplifiers, you know, and that means that the sort of content that news publications or disinformation campaigns produce can be more easily brought out into the world, and they have much broader reach. So that is dangerous, and that's what platforms should be working on, is the reach. But it's also important to recognize that, you know, I read a really interesting example that caught me completely by surprise. In the 2016 US election, the New York Times published 10 articles about the two candidates, Trump and Clinton's policies, out of something like 160 total articles about the election, just 10. And you know what else they published 10 articles about? Was the Clinton email scandal. I'm putting in air quotes because nothing actually ever came of it. They literally gave the same amount of coverage to that as they did actual policy differences. So there's definitely something going on in terms of content that people consume. And I've just read a really interesting abstract from a study that essentially looked into disinformation campaigns and conspiracy theories, finding that yes, social media platforms absolutely play a supporting role, but it's only a secondary and supporting role in spreading them. These are actually very concerted campaigns that come from the American political media ecosystem. And social media is part of it, but it really is mass media and elite driven. So what could we do though? You know, if we have something like this Australian network, we can do things like limit sharing. We can do things like use existing fact-checking sources, tie into the best practices. The existing platforms have been cross-collaborating a lot more to try and clearly identify when, oh, someone's posted a new beheading video. Well, here's the hash of that video. Please run all your video uploads through this checker first, right? They're doing more and more of that collaboration. I think one thing that's I'm expecting to see over the next, I don't know, year or so is a shift from all content as soon as someone posts it is visible to, you know what, maybe we can slow things down based on a sliding scale of how risky it is that it might actually be harmful content. And if we think it's likely to be harmful, but we're not totally sure, we just kind of give it a few hours before it appears in everyone else's feeds. And during that time, we kind of prioritize it in the moderator queue. Those are the sorts of tools and techniques that can try and balance scale and accuracy that I'm sure, honestly, they probably already try some of this stuff and we don't even know about it.
Mm. We've got a few minutes left for questions. If there are any, pop them in the chat. And while you're doing that, yeah, one thing that occurred to me, there's a statistic that's quoted in the Social Dilemma documentary that by adding a single word that adds outrage to a tweet, it increases the likelihood that that will be retweeted by 17%. And thinking about the compounding nature that Joel mentioned earlier. So I wonder if that can be determined through a study, then potentially if there are any, if a tweet has something that adds that has an outrageous word in it, then maybe show it 17% less in people's feeds, and that way it balances with maybe more nuanced and balanced views, and it counters some of those biases that we might implicitly have.
Yeah, I agree. Those are very interesting directions to go. What's kind of interesting to me is there is a huge disconnect in different industries between the level of sophistication in dealing with these things. So, all of you who are technically inclined, check out perspectiveapi.com. It's an API that Google provides where you can send it a string, a sentence, a block of text, and it will return you back a float, a number from 0 to 1, essentially, which is like a percentage rating of how toxic what you've just written is. And so if I write something like, that's a terrible idea, it'll probably get like a 0.7, I'm going to guess. And if I say something like, I agree to disagree, that might be like a 0.2, maybe a 0.1, right? And then if I say like, oh, break a leg on Sunday, it'll be fine because it's quite smart actually. And if I say I'm going to break your legs on Sunday, again, that's a high number. And it actually can give you more nuance as well. It can detect, flirtation, harassment, attack on the author, like literally ad hominem. This thing is pretty interesting. And there are some industries that have like never heard of such a thing, and they're still thinking like, oh, well, if someone writes the word angry, then like I'll censor their tweet, This is way more sophisticated, and platforms, like all the moderation tools used by the big tech platforms, do this kind of thing already. So I think it's an interesting question of how much more can they do? And I think it comes down to some of what you've alluded to around, taking action that they're willing to take to impact the bottom line, which is sensible. Facebook, Google, many actually post-election ad bans. They're all designed to basically reduce the chance of Trump calling it a fraudulent election as soon as he knows that he's lost, right? And he's setting that up already. But they're at least trying to limit the damage. And that's going to cost them. It's not going to cost them much, like a few tens of millions of dollars. So it's an easy decision. But what if it costs them more than that? What if they could do more than just ban the ads? What if they can monitor the content? Turns out they're doing that too. So I'm happy to see that they're taking good steps. And I think for all of us here, really the interesting thing is like some of the things they're doing can be applied to more different areas. The things we work on or things we know other people work on, that our friends work on, just spreading more awareness here. Because that's something that we can't really ever totally trust the platforms to do, nor should we, to actually spread that level of awareness, because that's a level of self-interest that is very difficult to act against when we talk about cognitive biases.
Yeah. I'm concerned about time. We got a few questions that popped through there.
Yeah,
so quickly, JJ, how can we help the Center for Humane Technology? We'll probably plug the website here. There's a contact form to subscribe to a newsletter that doesn't super exist yet, but will hopefully. I'll pop that in the chat, or actually, James, if you could pop that in the chat to everyone, that'd be real handy. And and we've got Twitter and Facebook, so you can follow us on that and just get in contact. Yeah, we're currently sort of working on our strategy to on moving forward. So we'll be able to, yeah, we're looking for, I guess, people with connections in government, people who are maybe in the academic space as well, who know about sort of writing white papers and publishing articles, and might have some good connections in with academics who are across these sorts of industries. Jeremy, what do you think about time for?
I think we can go until 7, and we'll have to put a hard stop at 7.
Okay, let's see if we can be concise in answering as many questions as we can. So what are our thoughts on finding the right balance between encouraging good quality content to be produced and managing power to the tech companies for its distribution and moderation?
I'll take a first crack here. I think one thing to be cautious about is, when we talk about good quality content, I imagine those of us here probably have a reasonably similar set of some sorts of liberal values, where good quality content is the kind that, alluding to another question here, is challenging anti-mask guidance, right? Good quality content is rapid and early sharing of early signals, as what happened actually in Washington State, in the States. Oh, hey, we've actually had a local hotspot here. We've done the math. It means this many people are infected. We need to lock down today, as opposed to the 2 weeks from now when the government realizes something is wrong. Those are like exceptionally high value things to do. How do we balance that? So this question is more about managing power to tech companies for distribution and moderation. Moderation is similar to the other question. I'll take that because I honestly think it's easier. I am currently working off the hypothesis that I think that the most damaging thing that we can do in our communication is basically block it off completely. In the sense of what has happened with my brother-in-law and I, for example. I literally cannot talk to him. It just hurts. It hurts so badly. And I try every now and then, and it's awful. And I don't mind that he has different opinions. I mind that those different opinions are so violent towards me, to the point that I'm like, I don't want to be physically near him. He's talked about carrying a knife out of patriotism. So that's scary. And that's not okay. That's the kind of discussion that's not productive. That's something that we should be moderating. We should be making it not okay for people to engage in hate speech, which is illegal, but also things that are essentially the same as hate speech, but they're not about your protected characteristic, right? I don't think there's ever a good reason someone should call another human being a cockroach. Just because that person was called a cockroach for being of a certain ethnicity, which does make it hate speech, why should someone just be that awful to another person? I'm not really sure.
And I'll flow into the next question because I think it's related. How do we allow debate while moderating content?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the freedom of speech versus freedom of reach that you talked a little bit about, Joel, is really important so that the content that we see is representative of the viewpoints. So if there's 100 replies to a Twitter post, and 2 of them are extremist, like basically nutcase responses, probably don't show me, and I can only see 5 before I click view more. Maybe don't show me those 2, just because it's going to make me engage more. And I don't think that I think that Twitter is probably taking good steps to counter this sort of phenomenon, but it's an example of a decision that can be made to get me sort of riled up and start to lose my prefrontal cortex engagement and get a little bit more animalistic in the way I'm engaging with my device, versus, well, let's show a representative view of each sides of the debates. If there can be some analysis, sentiment analysis done of those 100 tweets, then show me a broad show me a cross section of that as a sample. If there's, if there's, I was going to say, if any of, I realized I asked for text questions, but if people want to ask follow-up questions, then feel free to do so. But we'll have to finish up in about 5 minutes.
Yeah, maybe if you want to muster up to ask something face to face, I'll just answer Jeremy's question from my perspective. I think it'll be a bit of a mix. I think that basically the concerns are warranted. Some of them are just mistargeted. Like I think a a lot of the blame is actually should be placed at the existing media power structures that have existed forever. There's an incredible saying, which we've all heard in some fashion, which is, along the lines of, a lie can run around the world 7 times before the truth gets its boots on, that kind of thing. I actually looked that one up because I was really curious. Do you know how old it is? It's 300 years old. The original was falsehood flies and the truth comes limping after it. So this is not a new problem. It's just massively amplified beyond what it's ever been before. And so I do think it's a big problem and it's worth addressing, but at the same time, it's important. Panic serves an important function in our society.
There's something that I want to mention. We spoke to a group. They're called Thinker, or I think it's Thinkers without an E, THINKRS. They're starting a. Do you want to? Oh yeah, please chime in, James.
Yeah, so essentially there's Melissa, I think there's 2 other co-founders. The entire purpose behind it is to have a browser extension which contextualizes the news sources that you're consuming. So for example, it based on, crowd data, as well as people who have been like looking over the articles and like that sort of thing, as well as taking into account like, the political end of the spectrum of the people who are consuming this content and saying like how it's leaning. It'll give you information about like, okay, the person who's published this is kind of more leaning towards the left or more leaning towards the right. These are the kinds of biases that they have. There's some, machine learning backing it, and a lot of academics have been helping build out the model. Melissa is actually going to be one of our speakers at Spark Festival tomorrow, which is at 12 p.m. Yeah, that's from 12 until 12:50. I'll share a link in the chat as well. Anyway, sorry for jumping in.
No, great. Yeah, I think that's a good example of how we can give people a bit of context to what they're looking at, which helps just understand the landscape. Back when we knew we were reading a right-wing or a left-wing newspaper, because we kind of just knew the basis of the editorial content was. We've lost that, and this sort of a plugin, these sorts of solutions can help to add that back in. Yeah, so that's James will be interviewing a few people tomorrow at Spark Festival at midday, as he said. So one of them is Nirial, who is the author of Hooked that Joel mentioned, and Melissa, who's a human rights lawyer working with Thinkers. And we also have Seth Gentle, who is an ex-Google developer and really across this stuff as well. Joel's also got something to plug. You have a talk that's coming out for Atlassian developers or something like that?
Oh, yeah, no, we so as a product manager, they put me in front of people, right? Can you tell? So yeah, I actually earlier today recorded my section of it. So yeah, like I said, if you're interested in cloud development and getting some free press for your app, or if you want to just make money, relatively easily, honestly, I would do this if I wasn't working at Atlassian, because I can't now. You can build apps on top of Atlassian products. I am working on a new development platform that makes it super easy to do that, because everything is hosted by Atlassian, so you don't have to spin up your own infrastructure. It's called Forge. We have a developer day coming up on November 10th. So I just recorded my section of the keynote for that day today. And so I'm actually really de-stressing right now. This is really pleasant. So yeah, you can go check it out. I'll put the link in the chat if you're interested in registering. It's free. You can just go look at the stuff online. There's a whole bunch of great talks from people on my team too. Thanks,
awesome.
Sean.
Yeah, thanks for joining, and thanks for the chat. It was really good. Hopefully everyone got something out of it. And I'll pass back over to Jeremy now to kick into the next talk.
Yeah, let's applaud Sean and Joel for really insightful commentary and discussion there. And I'm in need of a glass of water. I'd like to propose that we have a 2-minute intermission. I'm going to pause.
Yeah, I was thinking we'd just tell the story of the company.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sort of make a different sort of vibe to the previous talk.
Yeah.
That way, yeah, I don't know, people will be able to just ask questions at the end and whatever's interesting in that story. We're good to go?
Go for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, sweet. Well, my name's Hunter. My co-founder over there is Leo.
Hello.
We're running robotics, and we're trying to automate fruit harvesting. So I sort of got into this about 1.5 years ago now. Started about 5 years ago in the past. It was Wait But Why as well. I read that article about the alignment problem of superintelligence. And that led to sort of worrying about the problem more and reading all the literature on that, and sort of being concerned, okay, this is the problem that needs to be solved. So what's the best way to do that? And it seemed to me that the best way was to try and get more resources applied to the problem, because especially in 2015, there were very few resources actually seriously applied to solving that, the technical alignment problem. So at the time I started a small sort of charity doing mobile games, which later failed. And so we learned a whole bunch of lessons from that we brought into starting this new company. So we're searching for a startup to do, which would maximize the impact we could have on technical alignment. So that's both in terms of scale, like the amount of revenue it would be able to generate, and the actual relevance to the field. Because the problem with the first company I tried to make there was that it didn't actually have any direct relevance to AI, which meant that when it eventually failed and it didn't make the money to apply to the problem, it was sort of left without too much extra experience in the field. It was in software, but it was not within AI specifically. So within that, searching for a I guess a startup idea, a problem to solve there, which matches those two sort of key things. I was sort of wondering what can we do in Australia that is better. You're better off doing it in Australia rather than moving to Silicon Valley or to London to work on computer science there, and where you could expand to being a large company. So an application of AI where there's no existing company that could easily take over your market, where it makes sense to be in Australia. And then within that, it was sort of clear that it was transport, mining, or agriculture were sort of the big areas where it hadn't yet been applied in this late 2018. And then within those, I thought that agriculture had the clearest expansion, because there were no, I guess, technological or huge companies existing in the relevant space within agriculture. Whereas within mining, we're sort of imagining, okay, if you build one tool that uses AI super well in mining, is a difficult to expand from there. That ended up being wrong. One of my friends made a company called Earth AI, which detects minerals in the ground. I say friends, I met him like twice. It detects minerals in the ground, and then instead of actually selling that, he just built a mine, and now it's a mining company, which that's a big expansion. So I was wrong about the limited expansion there. But anyway, within agriculture, tree crops, we're sort of looking at different, how things are done today within agriculture. And basically things are fairly well automated just with humans. Like you have a human driving a tractor around, picking sort of wheat or whatever. You have sort of automated watering and chemical sort of spraying systems. But picking sort of tree crops was like people with ladders still. It was like it was the 800 BC. Like you have individually, one at a time, removing fruit from the tree, like with your hands, which is just wild. Like there's no reason we still had to be doing that, I thought. And it especially made it a good point to start as a company, because if you can do that just at a human level, you could then expand to doing all the other tasks that are still being done by humans on trees, like pruning and thinning and gathering data about where the fruit is growing, which at the moment is just sort of eyeballed by farmers, just by walking out and seeing, yeah, it looks like there's a lot of fruit this year. We're going to apply this chemical to reduce it or affect the size. So by starting and picking, you gather all that data, which you can later use for these other tasks that have a lovely sort of expansion there. So I started working on that part-time. I got a job as a software engineer after the other company failed. And so I was working part-time on the fruit picking problem. originally we thought we'd just be able to solve it as a software problem, like buy an arm and just program it to actually pick the fruit. That ended up being very wrong. There aren't any industrial arms that really would work, because the trees are very tall, and the larger you make one of these sort of arms that is attached at the base, one of those guys, they become like exponentially more expensive. So we had to sort of design an arm ourselves, which could reach into the trees and get the full height of the trees, which varies. So you need to be able to easily change what the height of the robot will be, and what the depth into the tree will be. So around that time, I was looking for co-founders to do it with, which is how I got onto Leo. I've known Leo for a while. Do you want to tell about that from your perspective, Leo?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I can jump in here. Yeah, so Hunter and I caught up for a beer and had a few beers, and then we started getting on talking, and Hunter was telling me about what he was doing, and I was like, this is a really, really interesting problem. And yeah, he was obviously looking for a co-founder at that time, so we ended up just deciding, okay, let's make this happen. And I guess my background was more in the like more in the legal side. I studied law and got admitted as a lawyer, and then worked in legal technology and consulting and strategy and stuff. So I thought this has got a lot of opportunity, to grow a real business out of. So help set up the proper legal infrastructure for it, and then start building out pitch decks and starting to go out and talk to investors and different things like that. And yeah, it's been a really exciting journey so far, because we sort of went through and got incubated at Incubate, which is a small Sydney University-based incubator, which sort of taught us a whole lot of things about customer research. Because even though we'd started out with this hypothesis that there's a massive problem here, we actually didn't realize the extent of the problem and the complexity of it that underlies it. So by talking to heaps of different farmers, we called up farmers all over Australia and connected with a lot of industry bodies, and they were so positive and excited that like two guys were actually caring about this, because I feel like it's an interesting area. There's a lot of I think you sort of underestimate the importance of solving some problems that people haven't really put a lot of thought into. And you realize that a lot of these farmers, they've been thinking about this. This is their whole business, picking apples and having to deal with people every single year. And they've all been sort of preparing their orchards and growing them in different ways and going, one day there's going to be robots that pick it, but like no one's got around to doing it just because it's a really hard problem to solve.
That's a key thing there. Everyone with any sort of technical experience, including me, starts by thinking, I'm going to make an app. Like you can see a very successful company that has an app, and you think, that doesn't look so hard. And then you do it, and then it's more of a marketing problem rather than a technical problem to succeed in that world. Whereas this was almost entirely a technical problem, because there was no existing solution, and there was a massive demand for something that could be autonomously. It was like, if this company was going to fail or is going to fail, it's because we wouldn't be able to solve the technical problem, rather than because we couldn't solve the marketing problem, which made it very sort of attractive as a thing to do. Yeah, so after I don't think I told you at the time, Leah, that was, yeah. I was looking for, at the time I had no money, and Leah didn't have much money either. We were looking for outside investment, like a very small sort of, on the order of a few tens of thousands, so I could go full time on the problem, and that we could actually build a machine. I started applying for the accelerators, which sort of guide you through how to create a company. And the feedback I got on the first one said that we don't invest in single co-founders, and also you don't know everything, so you got to get people with complementary skills. I was like, okay, that makes sense. And the next one was due like on Thursday, so I called up everyone. I went through a list of people who I would want to found a company with, and then called up Leo and said, hey, you want to go out on Tuesday night? I want to chat with you about something. And then you said, yes, you want to found this company. And I put in an application Wednesday morning for that next accelerator. It was like a very fast sort of fast sort of thing, which was great because otherwise I would have to go to my second choice, which wouldn't have been as good.
Who is that? I never knew. Yeah.
Yeah. So eventually I quit my job when we got into that accelerator and started working full time on the robot. We were and still are, I guess, very strapped for cash. So we basically put in all our savings, and I went into like several $1,000s of debt to pay for it, along with the small amount. We've got $5,000 from the University of Sydney as part of that accelerator, and that let us build a prototype. Which, I mean, the prototype is like, it's literally just sort of Bunnings sort of shelving equipment, like shelving. It's not even shelving equipment. It's just shelving beams that we bolted together with a chain and a motor, and then we programmed it so that the motor moved up to the height that the apple was at, and then had a separate sort of chain that moved in and touched the apple. And that was the sort of demo. So yes, we can find the apple, we can move something to pick it. If you put a tree or a leaf in front, it can move around the tree and leaf and get to the apple. And that demo was enough for us to get the next round of funding, where basically we just told everyone we were raising money, and then a friend of a friend of a friend put in an investment of 10,000, and then someone else put in an investment of 15,000. Someone I met in the library put in an investment of 10,000. And we raised enough for us to last the next year. We raised $70,000 in total, which was enough to build version 2, which was a similar machine but designed to work in the field and actually expand it out to not just tap the fruit, but actually pick it off the tree and take it off the tree and distribute it into the bin that people regularly use to pick. So it carries a bin on the back and distributes the fruit into that bin. And do that, in real time in the orchard. That's where we are at the moment. We've got that machine. If you roll it up next to a tree in the orchard, it does pick. It doesn't pick perfectly. It breaks down often. It misses fruit, but that was enough to sort of demonstrate to farmers, to growers, that this is making progress. And we're getting close to having the problem solved, because their biggest concerns were sort of addressed by this machine, which is it going to damage the fruit? No. Can we actually find the fruit without hitting the tree? And yes. Can we avoid picking the fruit that isn't ripe yet and only pick the fruit that they actually want picked? Yes. So with that demo, we were able to get customers, which is fantastic. Just in the last couple of weeks, we've had 2 major pre-orders, and we're expecting to close up to 6 more. We're in talks with 3 other growers at the moment, and we expect to find a few more soon. And these are not, like, when you say 3 people are using it, it's you sort of imagine that where you need hundreds of thousands of people to use it for it to work. Each of these growers, if we were able to pick their fruit the way that they're asking us to, would be worth to the company like $400,000 each. And the agreements that we're getting them to sign involve a deposit of $1,000 plus just paying us for the bins that we pick. There's not a cap on it. It's just, if we can do this work, they will pay for it, and they've agreed to that in writing, and put money up front as a deposit for that future work. Which is really awesome, and it really speaks to how keen the farmers are to have this automated, because the current system is not very good for anyone involved, especially the human pickers. Yeah, so that's where we are at the moment. We're raising the next round of funding to build out a few more of these units. We've got the next version designed, commercial design, which hopefully will break down less. And we'll be rolling that out for the next apple season, which starts in February. Do you have much to add to that, Leo?
No, I think that's covered a lot of it. I think.
Yeah, it was a quick run through.
Yeah.
We can tell some little quick stories before we go into the questions. Like,
yeah,
we got kicked out of we were in this little shed that was a place we used to live at. A student housing place had this shed that we were working out of to build the actual robot. And then they locked down in March for COVID, and we couldn't afford to move into like leasing a place for even just $10,000 for the year. Like that's how much the very cheapest shed in Sydney costs. It was like way too much for us. So we built a tent. They put the whole, there's a massive sort of
The big tent. It's like
5 meter
his whole
tall and
backyard.
6 meter wide tent, and took up the entire, I live in a terrace house, it takes up the entire backyard, which is where the robot lives now. And that costs like nothing. And then everyone we told, I was like, oh yeah, it makes sense. I like that you're cheap.
It's like most of those guys who started Apple and stuff, you know, they had luxury garages, but we we sort of
Like
look up to that as the next step. Yeah. What about that? Oh yeah, sorry, yeah.
No, go on.
Yeah, no, I was thinking there was another funny story when we went to pitch at an incubator in Canberra, and we sort of had this pretty last minute. I think we had to go from something straight to that. We left and we didn't leave ourselves enough time, so we're pretty much cutting it really fine to get to Canberra and do the pitch to get into that incubator. And it was pouring rain, and we thought that because we hadn't had the chance to practice our pitch together, we were sitting in the car. We thought, look, if we can give it, this is a lot of pressure. Why don't we play heavy metal music? It's raining outside. We've got the windows down, and we'll practice our pitch. And if we can do that, we're going to be so chilled that we can to do the pitch. So it didn't work, but it was a good experiment. I recommend giving it a go if you're nervous about a pitch. So. But we were glad we didn't get that because it was.
It was a long drive. We would have been required to go every time. Or like there were lots of little technical mistakes on the way. Like we thought for this field prototype, it's an arm with a thing that hangs out the back, and we thought, oh, instead of making it really hard to transport, what if we just built the whole thing on top of a car trailer, and then we can just tow it there and have it on the orchard. We can tow it away. It'd be really easy to do all these tests that we need to do. So we built it on a car trailer, which sucks because we had to sort of figure out the best way to attach it so it won't come out, and work out where the beams of the trailer were ahead of making it. And then it was really high up in the air because you had to get a trailer that's flat, so they have the wheels are underneath, so it's very tall. So you have to figure out a way to pick low. And then when we went to transport it, it hung too far off the back. So we found the easiest way to transport it was to buy it or to hire a second car trailer and put it on top of that, which was just awful. We're going around with a trailer on a trailer in order to actually get it there.
One thing to add to that story as well is that Hunter didn't realize when we were building the robot that the tent he'd built in the backyard was actually too short it was one of those garage doors that rolls on and off. And so we had to like learn how to pull off these rolly garage doors.
We have to remove the door to get the equipment out. Every time we want to go for a test, it takes like an hour to take this door off.
Yeah, because they're really hard doors to take off, and they actually like spring loaded, and like the first time we did it, it just exploded.
Oh, it almost killed us. Yeah.
We were like, okay. So there's,
and that's And it's not a door to anything. It's a door that goes across the back of the yard. It doesn't connect to any roof. There's nothing there. It's just the way you enter the backyard, which is really annoying. Yeah.
And another funny story. Yeah, we randomly got like approached by someone to do an ad. So we actually did a Commonwealth Bank ad like a couple of weeks ago, out on an orchard, which I don't think they even bothered to use, but it was like our first income for the company.
Our first income was being in an ad. Because it was great. Like compared to working on the video game company before this, people hate video games. They don't want to talk about video games. No one wants to give media to video games. I was like, it was great. But the robot, even when it wasn't really working yet, like everyone loves to, like media loves to talk about it. We were on an orchard with a farmer, and we had this sort of robot that was kind of working, but kind of not working. And we said, oh, is there anyone you can sort of put us in contact with? And they said, oh, I thought it was a secret. I was like, no, we want to go chat about it. I said, all right. And it came back later that day with like this journalist who just was doing a story like right then. People really like robots, which I wasn't expecting, coming from the I guess the very hard to get publicity for the pure software app sort of player before this. So that's where we're at the moment. We're raising more money to build the commercial unit. It's designed, it's set. We're moving down to Shepparton to pick fruit for the contracts we've got in February. And soon we'll be hiring a firmware / electrical / cloud architect or engineer, basically taking all of those roles because it's a startup. So if you happen to know anyone or be interested for when we have the funding to hire another engineer, yeah, let us know. We might just, I know this is sort of a very different story to the first crew, but if you guys wanted to chat about, I guess, startups or superintelligence, particularly going into hardware, having not done any hardware in the past, I'd love to sort of have a chat about that. If there's any sort of thoughts or questions or other stories.
With the robot being relatively charismatic, have you put a face on it to make it really cute?
We did. Once, yeah.
At the beginning, we did.
We had this shelving unit, and we stuck on a foam thing with this really badly drawn face on it, so its face goes and presses against the orange. It was great. We got some shares on social media for that, which got us some attention, which was good. We found some people through that. Yeah. we
also there's this theme in all the videos, if you want to watch them, that we use really cheesy sort of elevator music. That it's quite funny. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fun to be a little bit silly, not take it too seriously. Yeah. Because even from this point, there's still a very high chance that we won't be able to get it to the commercial level that we're planning to for February. We need to, I guess, brace people for it. You know, potentially breaking, and it's much better if it breaks when you treat it like a human or like an experiment. But yeah, we're pretty hopeful by the end of the next season we'll have it working properly. And all the farmers are expecting it to sort of break at the start. I'm super clear about that. Yeah.
I imagine that getting it to stop breaking is something that will just come naturally over time. The like missing fruit, do you have like a strategy on how to improve that that aspect?
Yeah, at the moment we're kind of like brute forcing it. We can find most of the fruit on the tree through the camera, like the vision is okay, but actually being able to, like, if there's twigs or if there's branches in front, it's very hesitant to go in and pick it because it doesn't want to damage the tree. So what we will do eventually is be very clever and work out, okay, because we've got a distance sensor on it as well as the camera. It's a depth camera. So we'll be able to segment, okay, here's the twig, and we'll work out the best way to go around the twig and pick the fruit. But right now what we've done is just made sure the arm has, it can point at different angles, and we just search through the entire set of angles that it could go through. So we do a scan with the arm pointing upwards, and then a scan with it pointing downwards, and a scan with it at a sideways angle. And just, it's very slow, but eventually we do pick a higher proportion of the fruit. But we'll get faster with that over time, just through that clever software path mapping. Yeah.
Great. I was watching that video before while you were talking, and the elevator music was playing underneath you. It had a great effect.
Yeah, that's one of the videos that's been shared the most. That one's great. Even though it misses like 10 oranges and only gets 4, it's still like the farmers really liked it and really responded to it well. Yeah, damaging the fruit as well is a big for, like, humans do that a lot. So we only need to hit the human quality, which is what, 5%, which we're at the moment. And if we can get that lower, then we've sort of got an extra value add thing there. Yeah.
Yeah. That's it. So Tristan's question, I think it is, it's both. Like it is definitely more of a technical problem, but I think, yeah, the commercial scale viability is a really good question as well. It's the problem is that, you know, we're not the first to do it in the world. There are a couple of companies doing it, one called Abundant Robotics, one called FF Robotics in the US and Israel, and they've got units that they've been able to show, you know, picking in the field, and they've been working on prototypes and things. And yeah, the problem has been that those prototypes are very, very expensive, very hard to transport, very large. And so to scale the solution in a way that is acceptable to farmers and that is better than the current cost, which is just paying people to do it, is also a challenge. So we've been thinking pretty long and hard about the strategies of how we do that, like making the robot incredibly cheap, making it very simple to assemble, making it very easy to transport at the beginning, because I think a lot of companies do get caught up in that problem of going, well, let's just build the biggest, best thing that does the task and then think about how to commercialize. And I think unless, like, you sort of have to do both. Like if you can design from the beginning a commercial product that can scale, that is good enough to do all of those things and can solve the problem easily for the farmer, and put it in a solution that is commercially palatable to them, which I think we've tried to do. Whether or not it's going to be feasible for us, we're obviously not taking very much money as a deposit or, you know, any of the upfront, but we're sort of taking the bet that if we can get the funding behind us to enable us to do it, then, you know, the being able to deliver on that and eventually make it profitable and commercially viable is going to be possible. So yeah, but yeah, it's definitely a challenging balance on both of those things as well.
And then as far as the software and hardware trade-off goes, we're focused slightly more on hardware at the moment. We've basically done the very sort of minimal software that could actually do some picking, just almost as, mainly as like a demo thing and a test thing for the hardware. So right now, our focus is on getting the hardware to a level where the hardware doesn't break down, and where it's easily maintainable and easily it can easily be accessed and changed as we come up with new ideas. And then once that's in the field and working, we will be able to upgrade the software with the remote updates, similar to how I was talking about how it's very slowly brute forcing all the different angles it could possibly check the tree at to find the fruit. Getting that more efficient by working out where the fruit is relative to the things that block the arm and cleverly moving around it. So working on mainly hardware right now, but we'll be upgrading the software in order to make it commercial once the commercial hardware is in the field. Yeah, it should become a software problem, ideally.
Peter's got a question. That'll be our final question before we move on.
Beautiful.
Hey, Hunter. Yeah, I just had a quick thought. Are there any kind of middlemen you could sell to, like the picking companies? Because, you know, maybe initially, while the software isn't and hardware, whatnot, aren't perfect, maybe a hybrid model where the picking is done by a mixture of humans and machines would be good. And also the middlemen, if there are any that exist, they would have, you know, a much better understanding of they have a pre-existing network, business relationships, and understanding of all those sort of considerations that you wouldn't really have as like the technical sort of hardware software experts, or maybe you do, but, you know, possibly not.
Yeah, no, it's a fine suggestion, and we'll definitely be picking alongside humans. Our machine right now can only basically pick at the same rate as one human, or even slightly slower than one human, just at a slightly cheaper price. So we are planning on picking alongside humans, but the issue with the like selling to a middleman who then goes and leases it to the farms is that the machine still needs a bit of, I guess, knowledgeable maintenance and upgrades to be made to it. If we keep it in-house and we have like one of our technicians in the town visiting all the machines and all the different orchards that we're servicing, any change we make can be, we only need to train one person on how to make that change to the fleet of machines, and also they can very easily pass back what's not working to the engineering team. They can say, this keeps breaking, I keep making this change, or it keeps getting stuck in this position, and the feedback loop is a lot thinner there. The value of the business relationships with the growers is, I mean, it's a thing, but it's actually a lot more minor than you think. Like growers are very, very keen to use the technology. Well, actually, when I say we're moving down to Shepparton, we're leasing one of their sheds to actually work out of, and it's quite easy to get introductions from one grower to the next. Like some of the, like one of the people that signed the contract, their next door neighbor is now in discussions for a contract of their own. They really, it's not so hard from a a sort of sales or business relationship point of view. It's very much still a technical problem. So having that close feedback loop is better than sort of selling to a middleman. Especially since the machines appreciate that, like, they will get better as we upgrade the software, and we want to be able to sort of claim that increase so that we can keep growing as a company. Sweet. Well, that was the last question, isn't it? We'll go on to the, thanks a lot for listening to that. And yeah, if you happen to be interested or know engineers that might be, please put them in contact. Thank you.
Yeah, fascinating. Really excited to hear about how the picking season goes. Next up, we've got Tristan from Sempo talking about what he mentioned earlier around being able to do cash transfers to people in developing countries. Take it away, Tristan.
Awesome, I just realized I was on mute. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Awesome. Thanks, Hunter and Leo for the other presentation. It was really interesting, and it sounds like you guys have a lot of problems to solve from a technical perspective, that's for sure. Jumping in, I guess starting with my journey of like how I started Sempo. I've been building businesses, mostly like eBay and e-commerce businesses since high school. It was focusing more on like customer service and operations. I really built my first like high growth e-commerce business at 18, and that's where I kind of got exposures to the issues of using PayPal and like these commercial online digital payment systems, and then moved into more web design and freelance developer, and that was really my first exposure to tech and crypto and digital currency. I was lucky enough to get my first like real job, and that's where I met my co-founder. And then we started Sempo after work as like a side hustle. We were lucky enough to actually be able to join a VC accelerator program in Sydney. That was H2 Ventures. And now three years later, we've won €1 million with Oxfam and are scaling across the Pacific, which is really exciting. I guess this presentation kind of goes over, what the problem is we're solving, and then, what the product is, and then I guess goes into, some unique challenges that we've faced, like working in, emerging markets, across the world in places like Kenya, Vanuatu, heaps of different places. And just feel free to jump in with questions or anything. So, fundamentally at Sempo, we believe that cash is the future of aid, both humanitarian aid and development. 70% of Syrian refugees, they've actually sold the aid they've been given to buy what they actually needed. So, the tradition in humanitarian aid today is that you give people things, you give them shoes, you give them, shelter maybe, and you're really just guessing what people need. So we help NGOs give people cash. The problem is that it's hard today for vulnerable communities to receive money. If you've ever been to, different emerging markets, sometimes the financial infrastructure just simply doesn't exist. They don't have like the real-time payment system we've got here in Australia. I know like in the US, there isn't actually, I'm just turning my notifications off. In the US, there isn't actually, people still use checks. There isn't a real-time payment system. So that's really critical for getting cash into these vulnerable communities. The second problem is that people just lack, identity documentation to open up a bank account. We find it so common in the places we work. Then finally, the currency conversion can be really expensive. And, just the cost of doing payments in these communities is crazy. We speak to NGOs who literally the cheapest way for them to get money in is like putting cash in like a backpack and walking into a community or driving into a community, which is just, insane using pen and paper. So we deliver a digital cash transfer system that is fast, secure, and user-friendly. And that photo there is actually a vendor in a small community in Vanuatu making a payment using the system. So really what that looks like is three things. The first is it's an open source, adaptable platform, operational expertise in running these cash transfer programs, and then finally just the best practice financial compliance, in how you run a cash transfer program. In terms of who we've worked with, these are some of the organizations, and I'll go into some of the, particularly focusing on our program with Oxfam in Vanuatu and the Red Cross in Kenya, some like challenges we sort of face, running these cash transfer programs. In terms of like where we are as product market fit, I guess, we've worked with over 120,000 people just in 2020. That's over 1 million payments a year. The program we ran with Oxfam last year showed 96% faster cash aid delivery and 60% cost reduction. So that was particularly in comparison to a check-based system that they were running in Vanuatu in 2018 for a cash transfer program. So for them, where they're seeing like real world, cost reductions and faster aid delivery, which, really makes a difference for the end users there. So yeah, jumping into the challenges. So this is where it gets really interesting. So, it's kind of a bummer at the moment with COVID, because Nick and myself and the team, we like to like actually go to where our customers are and spend a lot of time there. Working when we're rolling out these cash transfer programs, when we're building the software, when we're developing the software, we run user interviews with people and like go into the field to understand how they're actually using our products. I know Joel went on about, how it is really hard to design a product when you don't understand, your user's perspective or like where they're coming from. And it's so true. Like it is so hard to build for every, use case, or if someone has a disability or is blind or anything like that, designing for everyone is a really challenging problem. But yeah, the first problem we found was with card authentication and security. And this is something that, we've been working with Oxfam, and we're really lucky to have them as a partner to understand, what these challenges are. So the first lesson we learned here was that, PINs aren't like a natural thing for people to be able to, understand always. Sometimes a lot of the vendors we work with, it's actually the first time they've ever been using a smartphone. So as part of the program, we hand out these NFC cards, and vendors are given a mobile phone for the duration of the program. And it's actually the first time they've been using a phone. So we've found that community trust and actually having these, trusted individuals in a community who have an extra level of training can be really important, for building that community trust, leveraging those existing trust networks that exist in a community. You don't necessarily need an institution to be involved in that. The second challenge, and this is something that we've particularly been faced in Vanuatu, and you can see one of the tap to pay cards there that we used in 2019 is actually intermittent internet. So when you're trying to roll out digital payments in a place like Vanuatu, the internet can go down for days at a time, and it makes it really, really challenging. And it's a really unique problem because both is there's intermittent internet, but there's also the challenge of how do you give, an affordable payment modality to someone who is maybe receiving 25 or 50 Australian dollars. And that's where we've chosen, NFC cards for low value payments. And this is using the MyFair ultralight EV chip, which is really common, for transport systems. So things like Mikey or Opal in Sydney. So it is like a similar level of security to what those systems have. So it can't actually like sign a transaction on the chip, like some of the more complex and expensive cards do. They'll actually sign a transaction on the chip, like a MasterCard. But it offers a really great solution for low value payments in environments where the internet is unreliable. And thirdly, another challenge we've found, and this is working in Kenya, this is actually an interface of the Sempo app. In this place, it's called Sarafu, which means money in Swahili. And it's the idea of like local context. So in every different market, like we operate in or working with our partners in, everyone uses payments in a different way. So in Kenya, mobile money payments through a USSD interface. So that's what you're seeing there. It's just, so prevalent. I mean, I think it's M-Pesa there. They have like a 98.9%, adoption rate. It's just phenomenal. So, you know, enabling transfers via modalities that people are familiar with, we've found that to be super, super important. And that's like, you know, we developed this system in conjunction with local users there. We had, because we're open source, you know, we had contributions from people who are based in Kenya. You know, we spent over a month there, like working with the team and the NGO team there, actually building this system. So they had an existing payment system that they were working with, very similar on a USSD interface, but we found that the reliability was really low. So we actually increased the reliability by 12x, and we saw, you know, 4x user growth. So in January, that was at 8,000 users, and today it's just under 40,000 users, which is really exciting because, you know, particularly in COVID, you know, people need more money. Like there's not as much tourism in Kenya. So that's like really exciting to see. And I mean, the beauty of being open source as well is we've seen like the local NGO there has forked our code and has kept running it even when we're not as involved. And finally, this is another lesson from Vanuatu that we've found, you know, running our programs and working with like vulnerable people in the community, is how you actually are inclusive of everyone. So, you know, a big mandate of humanitarian organizations is that you should be, you know, inclusive of everyone in a community, right? And, you know, in tech, this is really like, it's quite, you know, opposing to what, you know, technology is about, because in a way, like new technology, you know, you look at like digital currency, the first people to use that were generally like wealthy, sophisticated people who understood how technology worked. You know, you look at like Tesla, right? Everyone who's, you know, wanting to buy an electric car is buying a Tesla. And yes, they're getting cheaper over time, which is great, but generally it starts, you know, with people who can afford a new type of technology. Where in the humanitarian industry, they're focused on how can we include the most vulnerable people in a community, the people who actually need this technology the most. You know, they need access to cheap payments, but they don't have it today. So we came up with this idea of like a super vendor, and it's, you know, just an agent model. So similar to, you know, Western Union or something like that, you know, you can leverage these larger vendors who can facilitate basically a cash out for everyone in a community who needs it. And it's, you know, more empowering, more accessible, and, you know, less costly than if you were trying to sign someone up to a bank and then make a bank payment to them. I mean, you know, the bank fees just in Vanuatu are 250 Batu for one, you know, it's usually a flat rate, and 250 Batu is about, you know, $1 or $2 in Australia to make a bank transfer. And the problem with that is that, you know, if you're a small vendor and you're just receiving $10 a week, say, from a program, you know, 250 Batu is like 10%, right? If you're a large vendor, and we've got a program running in Vanuatu now, I mean, one of the larger vendors there has done more than $20,000 in the last like 3 days in payments. I mean, 250 Batu for them, like, doesn't matter, right? But it's that idea of like, how do we include these smaller vendors at a really low cost? So yeah, I mean, sorry, I just kind of flew through all that, but I mean, those are the 4 main challenges, I guess, we've, you know, experienced working in emerging contexts. I mean, you know, places like Iraqi Kurdistan, Lebanon, Greece, Vanuatu, Kenya, and now Venezuela. You know, we're really excited to be scaling up with Oxfam, you know, across both the Pacific and globally. We were lucky enough to win, you know, €1 million from the European Commission. You know, and that's the beauty of being open source. Like, I'm a really big advocate for open source technologies. You know, we're open core currently, but are going like fully open source with our mobile app and NFC technology, hopefully in the next couple of months. So yeah, it's really exciting time in terms of like getting involved. I mean, we'll be hiring another engineer, particularly on like, you know, DevOps. If you've got really good DevOps experience and how to keep up, you know, payment systems for, you know, being super reliable, then we'd love to speak to you, or a front-end engineer as well. You know, if you've got really deep experience in front-end engineering, we'd love to speak to you. So yeah, that's Sempo. We're a really small team. We're actually only like 4 people full-time at the moment, a couple of part-time people as well. So yeah, I mean, it's exciting, like what we've been, you know, been lucky enough to just stop sharing my screen here. Like lucky enough to learn a lot from some of the, best NGOs in the world. And, we're also in this really interesting, I guess, intersection of, humanitarian aid and finance, particularly, blockchain technology. So, I know I saw PayPal like launch their like global crypto adoption like around the world. 300 million users will now have the ability to like buy Bitcoin, which is like really cool. But we try and view it as more like, what can this technology do for us today? So a great example is in Venezuela, where their currency is currently, undergoing hyperinflation. We're using a US denominated stablecoin on Ethereum called USD Coin, that's built by like Coinbase and Circle, and that enables us to, as a company that isn't a Venezuelan company, to basically give US dollars or USD exposure to, people in Venezuela, and then cash out via a group called AirTM, which is a, peer-to-peer payment system that is really prevalent in Venezuela and in South America. And the beauty of us both being on Ethereum and using blockchain technology is that we don't have to spend all the time, if you're like integrating into Stripe, you have to go through their compliance process, et cetera, because we're just using Ethereum. And like, yes, there is some compliance involved, but we can just transfer to their Ethereum address basically, which makes it really like easy for cashing out like vendors in the program. So yeah, I'm going to stop talking because I've just like rushed through that really quickly. I guess, like, are there any questions? Is there any in the chat?
I might kick off with one and other people can chime in. I'm really curious about the open source business model, how you see the value of your company, because you said you're not only doing the core open source, but the mobile apps, absolutely everything. Theoretically, someone could just copy all the code and start their own version of Sempo. What is your core value then? Is it the relationships you've built and the brands you've built?
Yeah, this is like a really, really challenging question. Like, it's something that I would be perfectly honest with you saying like I don't have the answer to yet. Like, we've been speaking to people who have built successful open source businesses all around the world to try and understand like what is that answer. And there's not going to be one answer. It's really unique to everyone's different business. And I don't think necessarily that everyone should be open source, but I really like how, like, say Tesla has released all their patents as open source. You can use those. I think open source companies are more like capital efficient. Like, there is a lot of research to show that it is like a better way of building technology in a like more inclusive way. In terms of how we view like our business model, I mean, currently we're, from a licensing perspective, we're under the GPL license. We'll probably, like GPL v3, we'll probably continue to use that for most of our stack, if not all. And that's like, what Ethereum's using. We are looking at like, there's a new sort of class of licenses coming out called like business source licenses. And it's this idea where, anyone can use your code. If they're a customer, they can use it, no worries. If they're not, it's still fine. As long as they're not competing with you, they can still use it. And then after a year, basically it's a lot of them are time locked, where after a year, the code, goes into the fully open source license like Apache or GPL. So that's like a new common license, I guess, that's coming out. But in a nutshell, the way I like to view it is, we're building a closed source business on open source technology. So the code and the technology is open source, and people can run it. We had a team in like Nigeria start to like fork our code and build a, we're not planning on entering Nigeria anytime soon. So it's great to see that they're basically making digital payments more usable. But when it comes to like what we're offering to our customers, it's the relationships that were built, the expertise internally around how to actually run a cash transfer program, like financial compliance, the technical expertise as well. And that's something that today, like, we're okay at it, but every like new like person that joins, every like new program that we run, it's just compounding, I guess, is how we view it.
Yeah, it's awesome to see. I find it really inspiring, companies that do a bit like GitLab as well, that they've open sourced most of their code and open sourced some of their policies and procedures as well, Would you
Yeah.
consider doing some of
Yeah.
that as well? The internal knowledge, not just the code?
Yeah, for sure. It's one of those things that's like a really hard balancing act. And I guess you have to balance like how much does this impact your business versus like the benefit of being open source. And I mean, we've experienced firsthand, like if we weren't open source, we wouldn't be able to win this grant with Oxfam. So for us, it's like super beneficial. I think it opens up like new funding avenues. And like, you know, we'd love to open source more of our like policies and procedures. And I mean, we publish a lot of our learnings, like on our blog and like in reports. You know, we're pretty transparent about like where we've failed and like where we've come up with like interesting, I guess, solutions to problems.
Awesome.
This is super cool, Tristan. Thanks for sharing. I'm curious in the field, have you all communicated with speakers across different languages? And have you like interacted with any communities that don't have like a written language to communicate with?
So communities that don't have a written language to communicate with?
Well, I guess the first question is more so like just getting across the language barrier when working with these communities.
Yeah. No, we've worked in, I think the app is now translated into 4 languages. They're not all like well done. The primary languages are like Spanish and Bislama, which is what they speak in Vanuatu, as well as, I mean, Swahili for the USSD app as well. So it's something that we like, I mean, for example, we'll generally work with like local teams, both on the NGO side, but we might also like hire a local team to support us from our side as well. You know, whether that's an individual or a consultant or like a team that we've like worked with before. You know, we get recommended people sometimes by our customers as well. So it's an interesting, like localization it's hard because it's more than just translating your app and like translating things. Like it's so much more, and it is something that's like it takes a while. I mean, we learn like it's weird things like, you know, people were using Google Translate on our site, and because we're building React, it like, you know, it crashes it all the time. So we had to do things like that. Or, you know, if you're using, people will use like your app in weird ways that you don't expect them to use it. You know, it's more than just like translating the text, I'd say.
Cool. And are you relying on these local teams when it comes to field research?
Well, at the moment, like 100%, yes. We're pretty like heavily reliant because, you know, we can't really go anywhere at the moment because of COVID. But, you know, traditionally over the last 3 years, you know, Nick and myself have been to every single deployment we've done. And we've also hired like locals to, you know, run the program. So, you know, our first ever cash transfer program, which was in Lebanon on the border of Syria, in northern Lebanon, in Akkar, that was, and Halba, that was, you know, with a local NGO, and, you know, we hired 2 people to basically support us. We spent 2 weeks there, like working with the team, like understanding, you know, how we can adapt the software, like making changes in front of them. And, you know, I'm sure like Hunter can probably concur that, you know, when you show someone like a change, you like hear their feedback and then you immediately make a change, and like they're super receptive to that. I think people really like, you know, love hearing that you're taking their feedback on board and that they can see you making those changes in real time, for sure.
Cool, thanks.
Can I jump in with a question? And I don't know where you're placed to answer this, but just wondering, in my mind, aid packages are generally delivered to women, and money in many of these communities is handled generally by men. And having lived in Vanuatu, being from a Middle Eastern background, having lived in Africa, seeing that kind of dynamic. So how have you seen your technology play out in terms of gender roles in these communities? Has it made access to money more accessible, or has it shifted any of that, I guess, access to resource where, you know, women usually received aid packages and then cooked and you know, managed that, or is my assumption completely wrong?
No, I think your assumption's right. Like, it's a lot of the time, like, bank accounts are open in like male head of households. You know, from like some real stats from our like program. So the local NGO that we were building technology for in the Red Cross in Kenya, I mean, 60% of their users were women, and like they saw a higher like savings rate. So, you know, Chalmers in Kenya are really prevalent, like way of saving money. In Vanuatu, I mean, at the end of the day, like, we build technology, and like Oxfam is the one who decides like who's receiving the aid on behalf of like DFAT and MFAT. Like, we're not actually saying to Oxfam, hey, here's like who you should be giving the money to. It's like we're building like a vouchering system that enables them to, you know, deliver money to who they see fit. I know that they target like predominantly like women and people who are disabled, and like they've got a big like targeting criteria that they do as part of their, you know, scoping and like monitoring evaluation component. But there's definitely things that we like do from a technical perspective to try and support, you know, more female head of households to access money. So that might be things like, you know, sometimes it isn't, a household will want the male head of house, the male in the household, to be the person who has that card, right? Who has the ability to spend money. So what we can do is actually issue 2 cards that access the same like pot of money, both for the man and the woman, or like for, you know, multiple people in that household, you know, whatever the situation is, so that, you know, 2 people in that household can access the same pot of money. Or the same, you know, money that's been assigned to that household. So there's things that you can do, like, I guess, from a technical perspective to try and, you know, make that easier. But you're right, it is for sure a problem of, like, it is a problem, you know, that you can see like with traditional financial services.
Yeah, I see your tech as providing a solution to that, because most people would have a mobile phone. So to have a platform to provide some education around financial literacy, and then, you know, I can see it making access to money more accessible for populations that may not previously have had a financial autonomy.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's yeah, it's interesting because, like, I mean, in Kenya, everyone's so used to digital payments there, you know, and it's just how you know, make that more efficient and, like, you know, improve it. I mean, the Chalmers there are really interesting because traditionally they're literally just a wooden box that they collect all the like physical currency, and they'll put it in a box, and like someone's keeps the box and someone's got the key, like the treasurer, like they write down like everyone's deposits and like see, you know, create little loans. So it's like, how do we digitize that? How do we make it easier for people to, you know, save money, give loans? And that was a really interesting like problem. And, you know, we saw that like there that, you know, women were using the platform more and were saving more. And, you know, it is like, at the end of the day, that's like why we're not just building this system and like letting it run in the wild. Like, we love working with Oxfam and like other NGOs, because they have that expertise in how to, you know, localize software, how to work with communities, how to educate them, how to provide these digital literacy and financial literacy sessions. So yeah.
Hey Tristan, this is Dane. Look, just no question, just a comment, right? I'm from South Africa, so I've seen, you know, I know Africa, and there's lots of elements that, you know, you don't see living in a place like Australia, right? So yeah, just great job, right? Great job, just getting money into communities that absolutely need it. Yeah, well done.
Well, thanks. It's, yeah, we're certainly lucky to be working with some great customers and partners, and it's a yeah, really big problem to be solved. It's not easy, that's for sure. Yeah.
Tristan, can I just ask, I have to jump off in a minute. Have you talked at all with Give Directly? Are they doing something different in terms of how they handle their cash transfers, or is that, you know, a potential partnership that hasn't been explored?
Yeah, Give Directly. They're like literally what inspired me, like Michael Fay, Give Directly to get into cash transfers. And I mean, they do an awesome job. Like they're like just amazing at what they do, and have really brought the industry forward in terms of like convincing the aid industry that actually unconditional money is better than, you know, giving people things. And, you know, a lot of their like, you know, RCT research and all that, like it's really like driven the industry forward. In terms of like what's done differently, so this is like where it gets really interesting, and there's some subtle differences. We've definitely spoken to them a fair bit. We're not currently working with them, but they are doing some interesting pilots with an organization called CELO that builds the CELO blockchain. You know, they're doing some pilots with digital currency, which is really exciting to see. You know, we're like big believers in digital currency. Like we think it's going to be the future, both, you know, the existing digital currencies, but as well as central bank digital currencies, because I think it enables governments to take control of their, you know, M1 and M2 like monetary supply, and like have more control over money. Because today, you know, with fractional reserve banking, like basically banks have the decision to, you know, how much credit do they want to like give an economy. You know, so monetary expansion is basically up to them a lot of the time. But with Give Directly, I mean, they focus on, I mean, our solution today is more of a vouchering system. So how do you enable people to spend at a subset of stores that are enrolled in a program? You know, there are some subtleties to that. So the first is, you know, in Kenya, what we were doing there is this thing called a community currency, which is like this crazy idea where like a community, let's say a local town, they make their own token effectively, or their own money. And it's, you know, backed by, say, it's like a 25% reserve, and it's on, you know, like a bonding curve, in this case, like that says that, you know, if you put $1 in, it creates 4 tokens, and et cetera, et cetera. So that was like really, really interesting to see, you know, how money flows through those communities. And it's like more of an experiment, nearly. I mean, the local NGO who's been doing that for like the last decade, you know, they started with paper vouchers and then it slowly digitized over some time. So that was like a big difference. And then the second one is when it comes to digital currency. I mean, if you look at payment systems today, and like I've experienced this firsthand with PayPal, is that commercial like digital payment systems are fundamentally like these closed loop ecosystems. So yes, like if I have M-Pesa money, like I can use that anywhere in Kenya today. But if M-Pesa decides that, you know, I'm a business, that my business model doesn't agree with theirs, they can shut you off from the system, which is just like completely fucked up, because in Kenya, like M-Pesa is digital money, like it's everything. You know, so like local like payment systems have had to like go to court over, you know, getting blocked off from M-Pesa. And Give Directly loves using these idea of like open loop payments. So the idea where if you give someone digital money, then they can spend it anywhere, which is great. But they traditionally using like these existing payment systems that have been working, which is good like most of the time. But like I guess we have this opinion that it's these closed loop systems that exist today are not really money. It's more like credit for money at like a bank. Like the closest thing you have to money is, you know, your Australian dollar, like your physical money that's issued by the government. You know, money at like Commonwealth Bank or like any of these other banks, like it's like kind of a claim on money that you could get in the future. But, you know, you see like it's sometimes where banks like can't redeem all the money they have, you know, holding. So I guess like Give Directly and us have very, very similar missions. Like we're on the exact same like goal of how do we like give more money in the industry instead of giving things. It's just we're taking slightly different approaches. And at the end of the day, like we're not like an NGO, that we're a tech company. And I know like Michael Fay and the other guys who started Give Directly, they actually started a payments company called Segovia to, you know, basically solve how do we like make digital payments more efficient, and they've been doing some great work as well. You know, focused on like on Africa as well, Southern Africa, I think. So yeah, I mean, it's really complex because like payments is such a fragmented industry. Like generally you have to go like country by country to make, you know, the compliance work, like do all that, etc. Like do all the integrations. Yeah.
That was a really outstanding answer. Like I asked really, you know, quite a simple question. You got into an incredible amount of detail. I just want to say, you know, that was really great explanation. So thanks so much for that. And also what you're doing is really cool. So well done. Really cool.
Oh, thanks. Sorry for just kind of droning on.
No, it was great. It was great. Jeremy probably wants to jump in though, I reckon.
I want to give people an opportunity. If anyone else wants to ask a question, go ahead. Otherwise, we'll probably wrap up in maybe 5 minutes or so.
Hey, thanks guys. I've got to drop, but really valuable, and thanks for having me. Cheers.
Awesome. Thanks everyone.
Yep.
Thanks,
I
Jeremy.
think that's the end. I'll stop the recording.